Hello. Today we're going to talk about management principles, or as the chapter from Leisure Services Management, Chapter 1, is called Competency-Based Management and Leadership. So what is management? It is when people who direct employees and resources in an organization. It can also refer to the level of the level in the organization that an employee falls within it, like if you're middle management or upper management. It's also the process of reaching organizational goals. And management is also its own discipline. Like you can get a degree in management. It's with its own body of knowledge, principles, concepts, and theories. In this case, we're defining management as the process of coordinating and integrating resources in order to effectively and efficiently achieve organizational goals and objectives. So management then consists of the coordination and integration of resources, and these resources might be human. We're going to learn about that in the next unit, human resource management. They can be financial. In this course, we're talking about, budgets. And in HQR 3100, Advanced Organization and Administration, we also learn about, financial statements of organizations and that sort of thing. It could be resources, like facilities, the management, facilities management. Again, that's something that's covered in HQR 3100. It can also be technological. So, like about IT systems, we've got IT management, all the types of resources. Like think about at the university, there's, a whole team that coordinates like distance education, or another that does, IT, etc. All these different management systems. And this is all then to achieve this goals and objectives. This course examines management from a multi-sector perspective, and this perspective then includes public, nonprofit, and commercial sectors. Management has a universality that makes it applicable to all fields, not just parks and recreation. So when you're trying to demonstrate, for example, your management experience, it doesn't matter what field it's in. Managing staff is managing staff. All managers coordinate and integrate resource, and the difference just lies in what those resources are. So being an effective manager means meeting the goals, objectives, and expectations of the organization you work in. To be an effective manager, there are 3 components to consider. Effectiveness results when there is a balance between a person's competencies, the job demands, and the organizational environment. So first is the competencies. Competencies, by definition, then, are skills, knowledge, and characteristics that you need to be successful in a job. And these competencies are not just what people do on the job, but what they are capable of doing. So, for example, skills might be like physical skills that you have, or, specific types of skills. It could be academic skills, or it could be, psychomotor skills to do a specific task. Knowledge is certain understanding of information that you need. Characteristics would be certain qualities or attributes or traits that are needed for the job. And abilities then are aptitudes, your attitude, and how well a person is able to perform certain tasks or behaviors. For example, if the job needs competencies in, social interaction, is someone able to, speak publicly, for example? That might be a competency. So being an effective manager also is about the functions of management. These involve planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. The job demands are the second component of being an effective manager. The job demands then are like the functions of management. So planning is, developing the future direction of the organization through strategic planning. We have a unit on planning in this course. Organizing, be able to actually ensure that your plans are implemented. Having an organizational structure, making sure people are in the right place. Being a manager, you also have to lead, managing and motivating staff, training and developing staff, and managing staff performance. And there's also controlling, and that's not in a negative way. It sounds like being controlling, but it's about directing. I think they should call it conducting. It's more about being a conductor, directing the work to be done, ensuring performance standards are being met, controlling financial resources, and also evaluating the efforts of the organization. So there are differences between managing versus leading. Leadership and management are very interconnected. One may have the skills of a manager, like planning, hiring staff, but a manager without leadership skills is not very effective. Management is more the technical side of the job, where leadership is the human side. Leadership focuses more on the relationships with coworkers. It's about encouraging your staff to do a good job, enabling your staff to make decisions and to solve problems. There are various leadership theories, and the leadership theories have evolved through 4 generations. And they're, as the text says, that doesn't really mean that they're chronological, though they sort of are, but they've kind of evolved through time. And we're going to go through each of these sort of briefly. You need to understand some of them to understand the modern theories. The modern theories are the ones that are more important for you to understand. So some of the leadership theories are trait theories, and this is the belief that people are genetically born with specific traits that make them a good leader, and these could be physical traits or maybe interpersonal traits. Research used to look at physical traits like eye color and height. And obviously, according to trait theory, a person must be born a leader. They can't learn to be a leader. And this theory has obviously been more discredited over time, although I'm sure there are some traits that make people to be, better leaders. There's also behavioral theories. So this focuses more on what leaders do. It's about learning, just like social cognitive theory is a type of behavioral theory. Leadership is learned. It's not genetic. So it's examples of this are like Lewin's leadership styles. You might have heard of these before. They're used a lot in coaching leadership. For example, the autocratic leader, the democratic leader, the laissez-faire leader. There's also the Ohio State Studies leadership style theories and the leadership grid. And leadership grid is sort of quadrants of concern for people versus concern for task. If you're someone, you could have high concern for the task of the job and high concern for people, or, you could be a combination of those. Then there's the contingency and situational theories. These theories account for not just about the leader, so they started to evolve. These, instead of just looking at what makes a good leader, they started to understand that leadership is a reciprocal relationship, and it also involves followers or, the staff, and it also involves the situation. So these theories then are all extensions then of leadership theories. And there's no one best way to successfully lead a group because there's no one best leadership style, is sort of how they look at it. And that successful leaders in one situation may fail in another when factors around the situation change. So leadership effectiveness is then determined by internal and external organizational factors that involve the leader and the follower. And examples are this of Hershey and Blanchard's tri-dimensional leadership effectiveness model, which we won't go into. So finally, now there's some more modern approaches, but they've actually kind of involve a lot of old concepts as well. There's 4 often mentioned modern leadership approaches: the charismatic, the transactional, the transformational, and I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce this, but the Kausen-Posner Leadership Challenge. So first is charismatic leadership, and it's when, you're using personality and charm. That's charisma. That's the definition of charisma. When you're speaking and behaving in ways that reach out to people's emotional level, it's inspiring. Sometimes we think of charisma leader as being like being a politician or being smarmy. That's not what the intent of this is. It's about being able to relate and reach out to people on emotional. It's about having a vision of where the organization is going, to articulate that vision, to be sensitive to the environment and to the needs of people, and willing to take risks. I'm thinking of, for example, Martin Luther King. They're a charismatic leader. He reached people on the emotion. He had a vision. He could articulate his vision. And he was sensitive to the environment, to politics, and to the needs of people. And he certainly took risks. Then there's transactional leadership. So these are behaviors leaders use to influence staff. That leadership is a transaction between leaders and followers. And then in this case, it's like a social exchange approach, where leaders use rewards to recognize quality of work, and they also use punishment to correct followers so that standards are met. Then there's the transformational leadership. This is when you have like a passion to achieve great things. Again, it's about creating a vision for the organization and getting the followers to understand and also accept this vision as well. So this type of leader is really building trust, working with integrity, and setting an example for staff. So I think of this as servant leadership. If you've taken HCARE 2505, Recreation Programming and Evaluation, that whole book is based on the servant leadership approach, where, you lead because you serve. You're setting an example. And finally, then, is the Kausen-Posner Leadership Challenge. They really look at 5 practices that exemplify leaders need to implement as part of their leadership ability. So the 5 things that the best leaders do. First is to model the way. And this is that leaders should work side by side with their followers. Leaders should set an example through their own behavior. Be role models. It's also about having inspire a shared vision. Again, having a vision, helping people to understand and embrace that vision and communicate their passion. Third, it's about challenging the process. So leaders are usually exemplary leaders, are risk takers. They're innovative and creative. They recognize good ideas. They recognize others' good ideas, and they challenge the system and the staff. And that doesn't mean necessarily in a bad way, but to make it grow. And 4 is enabling others to act. So that's about empowering staff to accomplish tasks, the goals and objectives, and build a team atmosphere and foster collaboration among that team. And finally, encouraging the heart. Leaders should recognize the skills, abilities, and accomplishments of their staff and celebrate achievements. So those are different leadership theories. We're now going to move on to some of the management theories. Management theory can really be grouped into 4 eras. There's the classic era, the behavioral era, the human relations era, and the modern era. And you've probably heard about many of these theories, or like the people in them, when you've either taken sociology or psychology courses, or other business courses if you have. So the classic era of management theory occurred in a long time ago, over 100 years ago, in the Industrial Revolution from 1800 to the 1930s. As I just mentioned, it was prompted by the Industrial Revolution, meaning that we started to have factories. And because there was factories, there started to be management theory, or what's called organizational psychology. And in this approach, there was, different theories were divided into 2 approaches. There was scientific management, and there was general administrative practices. And we'll talk about each of these. There's examples of some of the researchers, or the people that spearheaded them. I will mention them. So first was Taylor's 4 principles of scientific management. This happened in 1911. Taylor's quite famous, and he really was kind of the first person to study tasks. You might have actually, if you're taking any, like, an ergonomics or human factors course, this might be something that you learn in organizational health and safety, because he was looking at how people do tasks and to try to make that to be more efficient. So he scientifically select, train, and developed each worker based on the task, and then cooperate with workers to ensure that this was followed. And he also believed in dividing work responsibility equally between the managers and workers. Then there was the Frank and Lillian Gilbreth. They were in 1916, and they were studying the work environment. They were really looking at wasted movements, and they were the first people to ever use film to study how work was done and modify it to be more efficient. And we would call this not management as much, but it's ergonomics, human factors. Then there was Henry Foyle's 5 Functions of Managers in 1949. And he was really the first to deal with the administrative side of management, not just about tasks. So he actually was the first to think about stuff like planning, organizing, commanding, coordinating, and controlling the organization. He had 14 different principles of management. This was, things like division of labor, discipline, order. I've noticed he had equity, number 11. That's interesting for, that it was about having equity among workers, that was important. And of course, this was also the beginning of when unions really started. At first, there wasn't. At the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, there was, terrible situations for people, and that, did persist for a long time. But more and more, when, especially as more and more accidents happened, people became vocal, and, they did demand for equity. Max Weber, someone you may have heard of, and he was really into bureaucracy. He coined the term, really. He really thought that bureaucracy was the most efficient in terms of precision, speed, continuity, unity, and strict subordination. And he looked at bureaucracy as characterized by 6 key points. You first had division of labor, so he thought that was good because the jobs are broken down into well-defined routine tasks. Second, that organizations should have a hierarchy of authority, the role in the organization or position, so each lower job is supervised by the higher one. This is really a top-down approach. Then there's formal selection. So that's when all employees are selected based on their qualifications, their skills, how they're trained, their education, or either formal examinations. Fourth, You got to have rules and regulations. So this is really about policies and procedures to ensure uniformity and regulate the actions of employees. And then fifth, impersonality. Again, these are rules and regulations are applied to all employees uniformly. So there's no personal preference. So I don't like the word impersonality, but it kind of is to imply equity. And finally, career orientation, that managers are professional officials who work for salary and pursue a career in the organization. So that was the Industrial Revolution, more. And then in the 30s and 40s is when the management theories were the behavioral era. And this was very influenced, of course, during that time. It was obviously the Great Depression, the end of World War I and start of World War II. And it was influenced by the introduction of a lot of labor relations legislation. There started to be labor laws. And it started to actually focus on why people do things, their motivation. So I'll go through these studies, or some of these main theories here. So you would have heard about this either in psychology, perhaps, or in you'll hear it. I know in research methods, it's often mentioned, and this was Mayo, who studied the Hawthorne studies. It was the Western Electric Hawthorne Works in Illinois, and it was he was trying to look at how much light affected productivity. They were trying to save money. They didn't want to have too much light. So they wanted to see how much light level did employees need to still be productive. But what he actually found was that no matter what type of light level he did in his experiments, that productivity always increased. And they started to, look at why. And lo and behold, they found that it had nothing to do with light levels, that acknowledging, being studied, what increased their productivity because they were getting attention. So acknowledgement increases productivity far better than financial incentives. That people work harder if they felt managers cared about them. And that work norms drove productivity by establishing a fair day's work. The informal organization affected productivity and made boring work more tolerable. Another theory came from Mary Parker Follett, the management prophet. She really looked at an organization as a group of people, really looking at this kind of the sociology, that it's not just a means of production. The managers should lead workers rather than rely on the authority of their position, and that workers need to be given greater responsibility, and that managers should be trained in management. She was the first to say that people should get education in management. Now, her views were largely ignored at the time, most likely because she was a woman. Yet today they are the basis of contemporary management thinking. And finally, another notable person in terms of management theory in the behavioral era is Chester Barnard. He was the president of the New Jersey Bell Telephone Company. And he was looking at an organization as a behavioral system made up of individuals with interacting social networks. And of course, think about that. He really saw it as social networks. And obviously he was like, a telephone company. It's all about creating a network, communication network. So he saw that there was 3 functions of managers. The manager should motivate personnel. So again, he's bringing in motivation. That they should maintain effective communication, and that they need to hire and retain quality personnel. Now, the third era of management theory is the human relations era, and this occurred during, it's kind of a long period, the 50s to 1980. And it really was influenced by growing workplace diversity. For example, women entered the workforce a lot, well, even in the 40s. The civil rights movement. There was also wealth until there was a small economic recession in the 80s, but there was a lot of economic growth between the 50s and the 80s. And there was also computers, and a lot of technology being developed. So again, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the key contributors to the human relations era management theories. You've heard of Maslow before in probably many psychology classes, but obviously his theory also influenced management. And it's looking at that base needs must be satisfied. Base needs have to be satisfied before people move on to higher end needs. So in terms of an organization, or, you need to obviously be making sure that you're providing basic physiological, needs to people, and then providing safety. So that would be like making sure people feel secure in their employment, their family, and then they can go up. So in this case, they'd be saying that an organization should also be meeting the needs, or helping to meet the needs of some of these base needs of their employees. Next is McGregor. He had McGregor's theory X and McGregor's theory Y. It's simply a fancy way of saying that there are two different types of people. As a manager, you can look at glass half empty and have a negative view of people, or a positive view of people, theory Y. So if he was kind of looking at how people generally view people's work ethic or their motivation. So we could have a theory X, or negative view, that people dislike work, that people generally avoid responsibility, that they need to be closely supervised, or that people need to be controlled to get them to perform. In contrast, we can view of people in a positive light, that people work that you can actually enjoy work, that people can accept and seek responsibility, that people can be self-directed, and that people want rewards that satisfy their self-actualization. So he suggested that theory Y is the true nature of workers and should guide management practices. And if you look at this, of course, I agree with this as a social psychologist. And if you've taken HCAR 2515, Social Psychology of Leisure with me, you would know this too, that we know that people do enjoy work. People can find work to be leisure-like, that people do seek a sense of personal control. They want self-actualization. They also want to feel a sense of relatedness and belonging, and to feel competent. So generally, in my view, is that people are generally do have a positive, their theory Y. Then there was also Frederick Hertzberg's motivation hygiene theory. Simply put, that he says that there's satisfiers or motivators, and there's dissatisfiers, or what he called hygiene factors, that influence feelings towards the work environment. So he said that hygiene factors are environment related, and they do not provide satisfaction. But if you don't have them, people will become dissatisfied. We'll just look at an example here, this table from the text. So hygiene factors, so things that can lead to dissatisfaction, would be like policies, work conditions, relationship with your supervisor, your salary. That those aren't actually things that motivate you, but if you don't have them, you're dissatisfied. The things that motivate people are recognition, growth on the job, advancement, interesting work, responsibility. Then is a systems theory. Systems theory comes from biology, looking at niche, ecology, how everything the plants and animals and all of that, and the whole environment relates to each other. So it's really viewing an organization as a series of interrelated parts that are dependent on each other to get things done. So every organization has different inputs, like, for example, time or staff talent, money, ideas, facilities, equipment. Then there's all these different processes that you have to do with these inputs. You're either doing program planning or event management or marketing or budgeting. And then you have your outputs, which are in this case would be your actual program or special event or whatever it is. So those are the more humanistic theories. So now is the modern era. The modern era is basically has really looked at all of the other theories, okay, and kind of taken, if you notice, they've really had repetition in them, and there was obviously some common themes with all of them. But in the modern era, the focus has been on quality. And, this really came from, instead of looking more at bureaucracy structures like Max Weber, to be thinking more in different management system. And this is particularly influenced by management systems in Japan. And this is what's called total quality management by Edward Deming. And it's also looking at best practices. So total quality management was started in the 80s, and it's looking at that managers should focus on quality from the customer's perspective and make it the basis of everything the organization does. So, this is like the customer is always right perspective, quality control, customer relations, that sort of thing. This then has developed, the total quality management led to a new wave of management scholars who really were reworking past theories and practices. And it really comes up to these sorts of best practices that are important to modern management. What we can see from all of these different theories is that's important that a manager has clearly defined values, and you need to articulate that, and that should drive the organization. This known vision has to direct the organization. It's very essential. That an organization should be customer driven. That it's really important to recognize employee contributions and also help them to do their job best, like in staff training and that sort of thing. Professional development. That it's important for a manager to foster collaboration among staff and also treat employees, fairly as a valuable asset. That organizations have to invest in their employees through training and development, as I just kind of mentioned. And they also have to give them some freedom to take risks so that they can learn. Like, there might be, it's important for employees to have ideas and to contribute. They might have really, really great ways of changing, but if you're a manager that is resistant to change or that you have to come up with the idea, well, it's not going to work out as well. And also, organizations have to foster a culture of trust, and that's about honesty, integrity, and ethical behavior. So currently there are different management trends then. We're going to go through what each of these are. There's learning organizations, outcomes-based management, and strategic management and leadership, and finally, competency-based management. So learning organizations are simply organizations that really value learning and education as a means to develop individual staff members and the organization as a whole. So learning organizations they really view staff to learn and grow and do professional development, etc. There are 5 kind of disciplines, or I would say categories, that are required for learning organizations. First is systems thinking, so looking at all parts of the system are interdependent. They also have to look at personal mastery. So in this case, a learning organization looks at workers need a personal vision of where they want to be and why they want to accomplish. It's about lifelong learning and career development. Learning organizations also look at mental models. A mental model is kind of your paradigm. It's the way you view the world. A learning organization critiques these mental models, like your assumptions and your generalizations, or your stereotypes. It's also about creating a shared vision. And it's also about team learning, about positive group interaction involving open dialogue and skillful discussion. Now, I don't know exactly of a specific organization that uses this type of model, but it sounds really nice and it sounds like a really nice place to work. Then there's outcomes-based management, and it's really strongly rooted in not-for-profit and public sector, and actually very much in parks and recreation. It's about uncovering what programs and services actually means to users, so focusing on the outcomes. This used to be called a benefits-based approach, but we're not looking at benefits anymore. We're looking at outcomes. And so this looks like systems theory, but with an additional focus on outcomes. It's the benefits that people receive from products, services, or participation in programs. So outcomes-based management, by definition, is a management philosophy in which the agency carefully plans and sets priorities with the purpose of realizing quality results rather than quantified results. So, for example, in recreation and parks, it's always been about participants, how many people attended. But that's quantifying things. That's a numbers game. An outcomes-based approach is about quality. And that's something that is really important, to our sector, our field. So I apologize, it might be difficult for you to see this. It's from the reading, though. But this is an example of a not-for-profit organization, I believe. It's looking at inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes. So the inputs here, we've got staff, money, time, and facilities. In this example, their activities that they're going to do are seniors are organized in a golf activity to create an art experience for parent and children and a city beautification. The outputs then, so what comes out of it, is the number, for example, for the golf, the number of seniors who golf, the number of people served. The output for the art experience for parents and child is the number of art classes, the number of projects done. And city beautification might be the number of flowers or the number of trees. But we need to take that a step farther and look at outcomes. These are the benefits from participation in the program or service or from buying the product. It goes beyond outputs. So, for example, the seniors golf activity. It's not just about how many seniors golfed, but the social interaction with other seniors, their improved health. For the creative art experience with the parent and child, it's not just about how many attended or how many art paintings were done, but that they've had a new appreciation for each other's interests. They have exposure to a different art form, increased art appreciation, a new leisure activity to do, leisure education. The city beautification, again, won't be just about the flowers, but might be decreased vandalism in landscaped areas, increased property values. These are outcomes. It can also increase social interaction. It makes people walk more when their city looks nice. So outcomes-based management is a good idea because outcomes matter. Outcomes make an organization accountable for its resources, Outcomes demonstrate how organizations make a difference in a community. And also, clearly understanding outcomes often leads to more focused and productive staff. As a staff person, I don't want to just work for like increasing numbers, having as many people come through the door. But if someone says to me, like, your job here is to improve the health of seniors, that's an outcome, or to increase socialization in our community. Another management trend is strategic management and leadership. So this is a management philosophy that assumes planning improves performance, so it's about planning, by setting strategies that the staff tries to achieve to strengthen the overall organization. So strategic planning is big. We're actually, Human Kinetics and Recreation, we're currently involved in strategic planning. The university has a strategic plan. Most, the city does. Most units have to have strategic plans. Government government institutions all have strategic plans these days, and certainly private organizations. Strategic planning really involves developing and clarifying values, vision, mission, and objectives. It's often like a performance analysis, like how well we're doing on certain things. You often do a SWOT analysis, so looking at the organization's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And then it's about identifying and implementing these like strategic issues and strategies. For example, are there things going on in the community or in the country or world that are strategic things to latch onto? For example, aging or environmental issues or active transportation. I don't know. But things that are trends that are important to society. And it's also then about implementing the plan and monitoring, reviewing, and updating the plan. And finally, the last management trend is competency-based management. So this is when we're looking at competencies. It's the implementation of management practices and strategies to improve skills, knowledge, and abilities through such tools as competency-based job descriptions, hiring, practices, and training. So there's key elements of competency-based management. As an example, competency-based job descriptions. This is when you list job demands and the competencies needed for the position. And you also review that and you update it regularly. It's also about competency-based hiring. So people are hired that can actually meet job demands. The applicants are screened for competencies. The interview questions are related to competencies too. They might even have like actual like tasks and stuff that you do. For example, some jobs, I myself have been, I know my husband has been in for sure, where you need to use Excel. That's a competency that is required for the job, or do data analysis. Well, they actually have you do some actually in the interview. There's also, or for example, in my faculty jobs, sometimes we have people teach a class, again, to see if you can teach, because that's part of our job. So it's also about assessment of competency gaps. So that's employee assessment to determine gaps, and not that it's to punish the employee, but to see where their current level is and where they need to be, so they can get maybe more professional development or education. It's about caring about their career progression. So again, a systematic training plan. It's a plan to direct resources to close competency gaps. And it's about skill and strategy alignment. So it's about developing a strategic plan for an agency and aligning competencies and job demands to help the agency achieve its goals and objectives. And it's also about succession planning. So, for example, like what's going to happen if someone leaves their position, or when people want to move up. So a succession plan is when you have all levels of the organization. So you're building skills and employees for the present and for the future. You know, if you know, for example, that someone's going to be moving up into a higher management level, you're also training the person below them for that next level job. You know, that's a little bit of the bureaucratic system, but about giving them skills. So in this course and in our recreation, we have really based a lot of our degree that's related to recreation and therapeutic rec around competencies. So there's obviously different competencies that are required, for example, for therapeutic recreation to become certified. For parks and recreation professionals, leisure services, physical education, these are the competencies. And, this course is based on helping to develop some of these competencies. We're calling this organization and administration, and, it's really about management. So you need to have business acumen, know something about that, communication, you need community relations, you need interpersonal skills, management techniques, and be able to plan and evaluate. In the text, they've got, they're listing all the specific competencies that are required for recreation and leisure. And, in a job interview or anything, these are the things that you need to highlight. So it's a good idea, I think, for you to look at these and think about, what courses are you getting some of this information and knowledge and skill in? How are you getting experience in these, whether it's in a volunteer or job? And then are there other things that you need? And actually, see, for example, if I was looking at, one of the next levels in academia might be, besides a full professor, might be like an administration job in academia. Well, you would need to have the particular budget experience. So being able to have management, large financial management. So competencies then are useful. They help you to establish training and development benchmarks. They help to hire. They help set standards to evaluate. And they also help to form the basis of career development and career advancement. So that concludes our unit then on competency-based management and leadership. And hopefully this kind of gives you a bit of an introduction of obviously what management is. Each of these different ideas about management and leadership and all those different competencies could be its own course. In this, we're just trying to get a bit of a broad brush, but at least giving you some foundation of going into entry-level profession where you might eventually be starting to do some management and leadership roles.